Hi everyone, thank you so much for having us. I'm Koby, Angelika, and there's another member there, Daniel. Okay, let's start. And I'll have to apologize, I'm going to read my notes. So before we diving into the depth of the future of work, we basically like to propose another question. And to ask who is not in the room when we debate, imagine, and create the future of work. Who is not being represented, and who's going to take ownership over the future of work. In the design context, it's very easy to see who wasn't there, or who wasn't in the room. Just looking at those examples, I don't know if some of you probably know Black Desi and White Wanda, the HP camera that only managed to identify white faces and couldn't identify black faces. There's the Apple menstruation app that was a huge fail, came only 1 year after the health app came out. Basically, Apple missing 50% of their users. Some more kind of offensive things that are happening in that realm was when Pokemon Go started. We found places where Pokemon Go was played in Auschwitz, death camps, and Pokemon Go was played in 9/11 Memorial. So basically, the company planted some Pokemons in those places. So, except from having our design practice, our research practice, we're also design educators. We're teaching design here in Toronto, in Canada, one of the most diverse teaching environments that we know, where 50% of the students are outside of Canada, 69% are non-white, and 2% Indigenous. Teaching design in Canada means that we have the responsibility to act upon the principles of Truth and Reconciliation Commission established in 2008. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission responsible for documenting the impact of the Canadian Indian residential school system on the Indigenous people. And we, as educators in this new system, we have to make sure that our teaching environment will never be anything like was created here before. Schools designed by the residential schools designed by Ronald Purdy, or the chief architect of the Indian Affairs working for the government of Canada almost 2 decades ago. Spaces that were designed with the intention and purpose of erasing the whole culture. And were active until the 90s. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission worked with Indigenous communities across Canada to develop a national framework for reconciliation. Some of those principles include accessibility, being accessible and representative, being transparent, comprehensive, inclusive, respectful, flexible. Going through this process as educators in a country that is going through a reconciliation process with its own communities brought us a second-generation German, a World War II second-generation German, an Israeli grandson of a Holocaust survivor, and a first-generation Canadian, to also reevaluate some of our sort of dominant tools that we're using and the processes that we're using as speculative designers through the lens of those principles. One of the most common tools that we sort of research and use a lot in our practice is the scenario building card decks. An early example you can see there to the left is Marshall McLuhan's 1969 distant early warning deck. It was designed as a problem-solving device that introduced users to unexpected viewpoints as a way to break rigid thinking structures. In that sense, a very useful tool that helps us think about the future. The overarching concept of all those decks that you see here was very simple. You get 3 to 4 variables. You combine them together to make a coherent sort of narrative that is a vision of the future. The narrative became the context of your design. The common variables were, of course, time, very close future, very far future. It was a place. It gives you a lot of some context, a social political context, and some sort of a change factor. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's other social values, and so on and so forth. What we found very effective is that using these tools in the class sort of immediately expose students and users to a bigger system thinking, critical thinking, and require them to look at issues through different lenses, such as political, environmental, cultural. But there were a lot of limitations to those tools. I think the biggest limitation is that those tools are being used in a very exclusive context. Most of the time, they're used sort of in homogeneous interest group that are isolated and disconnected from any external perspective, such as think tanks, corporation employees, and design classes. Diverse as design classes can be, all the students are still design students, all the students are still law students. And if you look at what happens in think tanks in the US, 80% of the top US think tanks are run by white men. Not to mention that all the interest groups, like, well, I don't know if you heard lately about the tobacco companies and how they influence those think tanks. So although the cars work to support the user in developing and starting and giving them a starting point to think about the future, those cars are very limited when they're being evaluated through the lens of the reconciliation principles. Another big limit was this approach of top to bottom. So someone has to write those cards. Who's this person? Usually, in some cases it's us, in some cases it's another tutor, in some cases we have, and in most cases it ends up, again, as a white person. Limitation. The last, I think, or another big aspect of those limiting points were this idea of accountability. Scenarios are created are too removed from users. There was no focus on the impact the decision-making of their design has on the day-to-day life of a specific user or a worker. There was always a missing component of the person who lived through the scenario. What were their needs, and so on. But what if we move those to a digital space? Will that help inviting more people, make it more diverse, comply with some more of the principles? The digital provides us some attributes that follow the principles that we found, that is following the principles, and created more opportunities. Things like using the opportunity of sharing knowledge very easily, making it global, making it a place where you can co-create, where you can share, you can collect information. It can be totally transparent for everyone, and it gives people agency. For our first experiments, we use the structure. We use the structure of an existing deck. An open source future poker by Strange Telemetry. That was one of the tools we started with our design class.
Thank you, I'm Angelika. So I'm going to take you to some of the experiments and how we try to map some of these principles that are created through the framework of reconciliation to critically reflect on our practice. So what we started was, in order to improve the quality of our teaching, but also integrate these principles of sharing knowledge and co-creation into a class, we asked basically our class before our workshop session that we had planned with 6 other faculty members to fill in some of the parameters of this scenario building tool that's basically referencing the Strange Telemetry deck that we showed earlier. And we wanted to see what moving it from the analog deck that we used before to a digital deck, what affordances that would give. What we added was the possibility of additional creation and customization of variables beyond what the original deck or author provided, and B, we added a user that you can see on the right hand side as part of the card deck. One of the reasons was because we were picking up students from user-centered design methodologies, transitioning them into speculative design methodologies. And other than that, basically the feature focus of strange telemetry were used in the same way as previously, and were activated in form of a workshop. So this is how faculty and students would fill in these different brackets, these components of story making, future foresight, social, place, in our case obviously Toronto, and then they submitted their entries. So what we see here is basically the database that was co-created between one course section, 25 students, and 6 faculty members. And most students of ours are in the age of 19 to 22. So what struck our interest before we got into class was that this added feature of users, despite the fact that all options were open, our students drove into the category that reflected themselves most, and we basically filled in the category that we are closest to. But both user groups included extreme users, 65 and 100 years old, to the same degree. But also now, who was not in the room became really clear, despite our best intentions. It basically reflects the same challenges that we highlighted in the government think tank before. And here we are just showing one of the outcomes, how a speculative design method can be materialized. This was actually using the analog deck that we showed before, and this is the work of one of our second year students, Jacob Coogan. He chose the cards or entered the data of light system, Trump's US, that we are very familiar with, 2022, Millennial and Internet of Things. So what we are seeing here is basically a project, a lamp that projects good news onto your hand, something that we are really in need for on this side of the border, I think. What to do now? What to do with all these insights? What we are proposing today is how we would like to invite various stakeholders to use open visions to break these silos that kind of like create these non-diverse rooms. So here we are just running you through how this looks like. We have different. We have an app that starts without any given content, so it's all customizable by you. You can randomize an entry database. In our case, these are variables that are based on the strange telemetry toolkit. You can randomize the entries, so the year changes, the system, in this case, traffic changes. And here you're basically seeing all the components for the creation of speculative design scenarios intended for a world in 2017, so basically 42 years from now, which is a very challenging time horizon for all of us, both for students and for us, and especially governments that have to think in this time spans. So to make it easier, let's stay within a closer 12-year time frame. And you can click a scenario, and what comes up is basically in 2030, traffic is one of Toronto's biggest issues. The provincial government is looking to help low-income families by using artificial empathies. And this is the usual top-down approach that we are used to. This tool also allows a bottom-up approach that is very much needed today as in the future, we think. Basically turning around the scenario. As you can see here, we state the traffic system in Toronto is slowly deteriorating and making it fast. And anything to help the situation by 2030. Low-income families are looking into new ways to use artificial empathy to change their situation. So the agency here lies within the bottom-up. And obviously you can also create your own scenarios after you have gotten some ideas maybe. And here we are giving an example how a billboard of these future scenarios could look like to be used or modified by any participant, and transitioning from a creative writing tool into a tool that starts making. Here we see how hand sketches and models can be used. But also this integration of a database exposes us to transfer knowledge to larger entities. So here with researchers such as MIT, choose what you're interested in order to gain more knowledge about a topic that you're interested in, and you can research that. Here's a user specified with needs that we're referencing in Manfred Faxné's Fundamental Human Needs, but they can also be modified by you, and the futures of making could look something like that. Here, there's also another opportunity for looking back what scenarios you've created throughout your engagement with the tool. So, to sum up the talk, we demonstrated the importance, A, of bringing everyone to the table when futures, such as the future of work, are debated and created, and B, our attempt to contributing to a greater effort to embed reconciliation principles into every aspect of our lives in Canada, through integrating the principles of the Truth and Reconciliation framework within our own framework in design processes and design thinking. While we are still in negotiations and obviously reconciliation, and it's a much bigger task, we are still developing the app, and we are ready to receive interest from these parties and would love to hear from you if there's something you would like to open your rooms to. And thank you.
Thank you, Angelika and Koby. So we're going to move to the last talk in this section of the day with Juan. It's making his way from the back of the room.